Hoishanu! Hoishanu! That is Barry Weber and Ari Hill out of Israel. They just released that, I think, yesterday. It's a song for Sukkot. Hoishanu. It's talking to God. It's a prayer. Rescue us, redeem us, save us. Hoishanu. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on this fine Tuesday evening? Stephen from Dover, New Hampshire. Melissa from Great Neck. Let me turn off that air conditioning. Gets hot in here, but otherwise the audio is terrible. James Roth from Indianapolis. Tom Beck from Pennsylvania. Nancy from Southern Pines, North Carolina. Randy from Florida. Brandon from Knoxville. Guy from Dayton, Ohio. If this is your first time tuning in, let us know so we can welcome you. Anne from Merced, Patrick from Palm Springs, Rochelle saying Hag Sameach Sukkot, Hillary, Shalom from Cincinnati, loves the music, Sheila from Indiana, Sharon, Fran Brooks from Lebanon, New Jersey, Paula from Chicago, Mark Kaufman says good evening. And thanks to Nina for posting my uncle's story. That's on our newsfeed now. Incredible story. Check it out. John Shore from Sedona. Maria Gabriela from Cincinnati. Rochelle says Hag Sameach Sukkot. Stephanie Shana Tova U'Metuka. Teresa from Lufkin, Texas. Christiana from Phoenix. Andrea from Florida. John Ferris is with us. Andrea Turner, it's her first time. Welcome, Andrea. Susan from New York City. Teresa's first time. Welcome, Teresa. And Kay Engel, another first timer from Annapolis, Maryland. Shalom and welcome. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn is with us from Texas. Leonidas says Shalom. Mirasia Janut is with us from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Today's learning on AT Daily is dedicated by Stan Kreis to my father, David Ben Solomon, whose memory I will always cherish and who taught me even in his silences. What a beautiful dedication. Stan, may your father's memory always be for a blessing. And may the learning that we do today, in his merit serve to push him a little further and higher in the celestial realms, a little closer to the heavenly throne. All right. We've got a big page today. We're doing a double. This is a good time to catch up. So we're going to be doing 2 pages. They're relatively short pages. And there's actually a lot of material we're going to skip, because I just have a feeling that our audience is not so excited to do extensive geometrical calculations. So we'll allude to what the sages are doing. And if you want to check out the math for yourself, it's on this page. Absolutely, I invite you to do so. But where are we? This is Tractate Eruvin, the 3rd volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 5. We're going to complete our discussion with God's help of Mishnah number 1 and open our discussion of Mishnah number 2. This is pages 56 and 57. That's Daf Nun Vav and Daf Nun Zayin. We ended yesterday with Rav Yehuda's warning in the name of Rav that living a life in huts, in temporary huts, right, where you never really make a permanent home for yourself. You're living a nomadic life, just always in a tent, never in some kind of permanent dwelling. It's not a good life. It's too difficult. It's particularly difficult to raise a family that way. He's telling us you gotta put down some roots. Today, Rav Huna adds that now that we're talking about what is a suitable place to live, he says that for a Torah scholar, okay, so for a Torah scholar, but why wouldn't this advice apply to everybody? But he's saying specifically for a Torah scholar, it is not permitted to dwell in a city that lacks vegetables. Now, the title of today's show is It Turns Out That Veggies May Not Be So Good. Now, the teaching here is that you can't even live in a city if there's not a good supply of vegetables there. So certainly, according to Rav Huna, a person's got to have an ample supply of vegetables. But when that statement of Rav Huna is, compiled into the Talmud at this point in our progress, the Gemara itself immediately objects and says, wait a minute, are vegetables beneficial? Didn't we learn in a Baraisa, so older teachings from the Mishnaic period that didn't quite make it into the Mishnah, but authoritative nonetheless? Didn't we learn in a Baraisa that three things cause three problems? Okay, so the three problems are they increase one's waste. That's unclear to me what that means, to increase waste. I mean, if it's going to make you, things go through you better, so you go to the bathroom more, that seems like a positive, but it's definitely being presented as a negative. So who knows? Maybe it just means that, more waste is sort of like doesn't leave you, it's inside you, something that's going to be, detrimental to your health. That it will bend your stature, definitely a negative, right? Something that's going to cause people to stoop as they get older. And remove 1/500th of the light from a person's eyes, right? So if you think about people who have an animation to them, people who have an animated spirit, it's like they have a twinkle in their eye. That's always how Abraham Lincoln was described. He had a twinkle in his eye. But these things, these three things, are going to remove. I guess each time, who knows how many times you have to indulge in them for it to reach this fraction of removing 1/500th of the light of a person's eyes. And what are these three things? Coarse bread, right? So bread made from unsifted flour, new beer, and vegetables. So according to this Baraisa, vegetables are one of these three things that increases waste within a person, leads them to have, that their stature gets bent, they stoop, and that it removes 1/500th of the light from a person's eyes. So how could this be? So the Gemara says, well, we have two teachings. Is Rav Huna wrong? And so it reconciles. It says, no. Rav Huna is correct. But what he was talking about is particular vegetables. There are certain vegetables that are very healthy and that you should make sure are part of your diet. So according to the Gemara, Rav Huna was referring to three vegetables in particular: garlic, which is excellent for one's health; leeks, which are good, but only half as good as garlic; and radishes, which according to this Gemara, where a person has radishes, he has the elixir of life. So radishes get big props from our sages here in the Talmud. Interesting that all three, grow underground. All three are some kind of a root. So what about the rest of vegetables? I mean, we're told all the time, eat your veggies, eat your veggies. Veggies are great. Now, it's possible that what applied 2,000 years ago when our sages were giving over their teachings, conditions are different now. Vegetables back then, had certain problems. The water content may have been unhealthy if the water itself was unhealthy. If you were relying too much on these kinds of vegetables, maybe it's a problem. Maybe the tomato and nightshade families, not so good. It seems odd to our ear when we hear all the time that veggies are wonderful and you always got to increase the amount of veggies that you eat. But amazingly enough, today we read this page, and today I read an article in the newspaper, in the Wall Street Journal, which said that in the time of COVID, we probably, lots of us have heard, you may have, if you haven't heard, you should hear, that zinc is very important. A person has to have zinc in their diet, particularly as they get older. As people get older, it becomes more and more difficult to keep our zinc levels up. This is what I read today. And when your zinc levels go down, you become much more susceptible to pneumonia, to sepsis, to diabetes, to kidney disease, and to, what was the other one? It was kidney disease. I didn't write the three things. It was diabetes, kidney disease, let me make sure, I want to get this right. Pneumonia, recurring sepsis, as well as suffer from conditions from diabetes, kidney disease, and chronic fatigue syndrome, all associated with low levels of zinc. What is the primary source of zinc in the diet? Meat, particularly red meat. The best place to get zinc, apparently, is red meat. That's what the article in the journal said today. And as people get older, very often they're told for their health, to diminish the amount of red meat for other reasons. Also, maybe in ancient times, it was difficult for people to eat red meat. They didn't have their teeth, they would fall out. They didn't have dentures. They weren't replaced. They didn't have those possibilities. For whatever the reason, one thing that they didn't have in ancient times is the possibility to have zinc supplements. So, it is definitely associated that people become more susceptible to all these kinds of disease and COVID itself if our zinc levels are low. I'm not telling you to go out and eat red meat, but it sounds like it's not a bad thing. And if you're not eating red meat, make sure that you're taking some zinc supplements. And if you are not sure, maybe check with your doctor, find out what your zinc levels are. But it turns out that vegetarians who are getting only their calories from vegetables and not from meat are particularly vulnerable to these low zinc levels, and that is problematic. So this is not a show about diet and all kinds of stuff. But it's interesting that on the same day that we're reading that vegetables are good, but they may not be so great, they're not all that. Right? I think as usual, what we're learning is that moderation in all things, balanced diet, make sure that you don't give up an entire food group, just balance things out. And everybody's chemistry is different, so there's no universal prescriptions for everybody. The Rav Huna was talking about these are rules for Torah scholars, that they must have their vegetables, but then the Gemara said that vegetables can be harmful. It all in good measure, it seems to me. And I imagine I'll see some comments and questions about this subject. I am no kind of expert. I'm just reporting. Rav Huna says vegetables are good. The Gemara says vegetables can cause harm. Garlic leeks and radishes seem to be excellent. And today's Wall Street Journal says make sure you get enough zinc. And zinc requires either eating meat or taking zinc supplements. There's other sources of zinc, but you may want to check your zinc level the next time you go by your doctor. Let's move on. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav that a city with too many ascents and descents, right? So living in a city that's all going up and down stairs, it takes a toll on a person. You might think, oh, well, they're going to get, it's a lot of fitness, right? Going up and down stairs is good for a person in terms of exercise. But if you have to go up and down steep stairs every time you go somewhere, as you get older, that's going to be difficult for a person, and it may cause someone to age a little bit, to seem as if they're older before their time. Now we return to the subject of our Mishnah, which is how we extend or how we delineate the boundaries of a city. Where does the edge of a city lie? Because we know that on Shabbos, we can walk anywhere within the city. If our dwelling is within a city, it's like the 4 cubits that we occupy with our person. First, it's expanded to include our house, and then it's expanded to include the entire city. And so we only start counting the 2,000 cubits that a person is allowed to walk in any direction from the edge of the city. That's what this Mishnah is about. That's what this chapter is about. And particularly this Mishnah is how we delineate the city edge. Okay, so we said that we're going to expand the city edge. Anytime that there's a residence that's near the city, if it's within 70 cubits of what was the city's edge, now there's a residence just a little bit outside. We're going to move the whole edge of the city, and we're going to keep the edges of the city as straight lines, either a rectangle or a square. The question then becomes, okay, so if you take a round city, for example, like this, so the city is round, so we're going to square it, right? We're going to make that the edges of the city are like the inner green square. And so that's how we're going to define the city. The city edges would be that inner square. And then you're going to get 2,000 cubits in any direction, and that's that outer square. But you'll notice that if you measure 2,000 cubits, right, as your Shabbos boundary from here, right, from the middle of this side down to the outer edge, that's 2,000 cubits. Then if you look from this corner out to this corner, right, from here to here, that's going to be more than 2,000 cubits. And that is an amplification of the area where one can walk. It's because this whole body of law is rabbinic in nature, how far we can walk on Shabbos. And so wherever there's a case of doubt, wherever there's a marginal area that sages are not sure which way to measure, which way to hold, they're going to be lenient. And so they're going to expand the area that one can walk, and it's going to be a square. You might have thought that if it's going to be 2,000 cubits in any direction, that you would round the corners of this outer, right? This outer, can you see that? This outer area. You might measure 2,000 cubits from here, that's to there, and then you might have rounded off those corners, but they don't. They don't round off the corners. So even though you're going to pick up extra distance if you're walking out towards that diagonal, that's the way it works. Okay. If you're squaring a city, right? So that's in terms of city edges. So this is all hypothetical. The city itself is like a circular city. Now, if you're going to square the edges for the purposes of measuring the boundary and how far you can walk, we saw that if the city itself is a square and it happened to be aligned this way, where north is a corner and south is a corner, then you would just measure that way. But if you're starting with a round city and you're going to square it off, then you're going to arrange it so that this edge is north and this edge is south. You're not going to arrange it a little bit like this or a little bit like that or a little bit like that. You're going to make it so that there's a straight edge on the north side of the city and a straight edge on the south side, a straight edge east and a straight edge west. How do you know what's north and what's south, what's east and what's west? So now the ancients are going to give us a little bit of a lesson, right? Before they had compasses, before they were aware of magnetic north and had the device of a compass to know which way is north, how did they know which way is north and which way is south? Not always so simple. So the first answer that's given is the stars. The ancients were very aware of the stars. Our sages knew a lot about the stars in the sky, the movement of the constellations, etc. Eventually, we'll get to one of the tractates in the Talmud where we're going to spend many pages looking at basically the horoscope and how it works and the movement of the stars in the sky. For today, we're just going to say that they knew about the North Star. They knew that the constellation, which is consistently in the north, is Ursa Major. We also call it the Big Dipper. And the Big Dipper points to the Little Dipper. And the sort of star at the end of the Little Dipper is the North Star. So if you could recognize the Big Dipper, then you basically know which way is north. This is all supposing that you're in the northern hemisphere and those constellations are visible to you. Then they say, so that's north. Where is south? South, at least for certain times of the year, is where Scorpio is, right? So Scorpio is one of the southernmost constellations in the northern hemisphere. But it's not always there. At the times of year when Scorpio is present, then you could say, okay, over there is south. That's a way to understand north and south. What if a person doesn't understand the constellations? Say the sages. What if a person doesn't understand the constellations? How will he know where is north and where is south? You know, it's not that complicated if you know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, right? If you know where the sun is rising and where it's setting, so then you have a pretty good feeling of where north and south is, because if that's east and that's west, so north is that way and south is that way. But that's a little easier said when you live in a pretty flat area. If you live in a kind of undulating area, and a lot of the Holy Land is undulating, and I'm not sure how Babylonia is, but I bet there's areas that are certainly hilly and undulating. It's not so simple to see really where the sun is rising. So they give advice that's really interesting, and that goes like this. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. But as we're moving toward summer, the place where it rises and the place where it sets is going to move further and further north. The whole arc is going to move toward the north. Then as we move toward winter, that whole arc is going to move toward the south. That's why it ends up being lower in the sky, right? In the northern hemisphere, the sun, its highest point at noon is going to be lower and lower in the winter, higher and higher in the summer. And if you can tell which way that whole arc is moving, as the days go by, it moves toward the north as we approach the longest day of the year, and the first day of summer, and it moves toward the south as we approach the shortest day of the year, in the first day of winter. So that's another way that you can understand where is north and where is south if you're patient, right? That requires observing this day after day after day. And the sages were patient. They had, and it's not just the sages of the Talmud, it's not just the sages of the Jewish people. Many ancient peoples had a terrific awareness of the motion of the celestial bodies that they picked up by observing it, day after day, month after month, year after year after year after year. And so here our sages tell us 2,000 years ago, they knew quite well that the solar year was 365 days, but not just 365 days, that it was 365 days and 6 hours. But not just that it was 365 days and 6 hours, and that's why we have a leap year, right? Every 4 years, we add a day to the calendar, February 29th. They didn't have that calendar then. They had a different kind of calendar, but they knew that the solar calendar was 365 days and a quarter of a day, and they knew that it was a little more than a quarter of a day. I do believe that there is an additional day added, I don't know, like every 100 or every 200 years. I looked this up once and I can't remember. Maybe somebody can fill that in for us in the comments. But it's a little bit more than 365 and a quarter, or maybe it's a little less than 365 and a quarter. And so you don't have that leap year, every 100 years. I forget exactly how it works, but they were quite aware of those, tiny differences. Those tiny, tiny differences in the length of a year, even though they didn't have telescopes and they didn't have computers, and they didn't have any of that. It's quite extraordinary what they knew about the length of the year. Okay, where did I have that? I just want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. That was back here. So Shmuel said the vernal equinox occurs only at the beginning of one of the 4 quarters of the day, either precisely at the beginning of the day or precisely at the beginning of the night or at midday or at midnight. Like, to know when is the equinox, right? When a day is exactly 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, and when that moment occurs, whether it's in the morning or at noon. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary that they know that. And that they can tell, right, and that there are 91 days and 7.5 hours between the beginning of one season and the next season. I mean, they just really had a lot of knowledge about that. Okay. Yeah, right. So here it is. The calculation of the seasons cited here is in accordance with Shmuel's opinion that the solar year consists of exactly 365 days and 6 hours. The intercalation of the year, however, follows the opinion of Rav Ada, who calculated the solar year as a few moments shorter than that, a few seconds less than 365 days and 6 hours. Extraordinary that they had that kind of precision so long ago. Okay. Then the sages, where the real, geometric calculations begin, is when they start looking at the Levitical cities, right? The cities of the Levites. There were 48 cities of the Levites. Some of them were cities of refuge, some were not. But the Levites did not get farms, right? They did not get whole tribal areas in the Holy Land when the children of Israel came out of the wilderness into Israel. The Levites were not given, the families of the Levites were not given portions of land. Their portion was to serve in the temple, to serve the priest, to do what was necessary for the temple, and to live in cities, and to basically, be the merchant class, right? So they were the ones that were going to arrange the trading, whatnot, between the other tribes who would be basically agriculturally based peoples. Although there was Zebulun and Issachar in the north, and one of those tribes was more, about ship trading by ship with other lands. At any rate, the Levites did not get land, they got cities. A Levitical city, a city of the Levite, also had the feature, spelled out in the Torah, that surrounding the city. Now, those cities were laid out as squares. That's why we square even a round city for the purpose of measuring its Shabbos boundary, as we learned a few pages ago. The cities of the Levites were laid out as squares, and around the city there was 1,000 cubits in every direction of clear space. For whatever reason, God said that the Levite cities should have 1,000 cubits of clear space around them. I don't know if that was room for expansion later, or so that the cities would remain defined. I think it was so that they would remain defined, because then their fields and other stuff that was owned by the people in the city couldn't come any closer than 1,000 cubits to the city. So they had this clear space. And the sages will engage in a long discussion of how you account in a Levitical city for this 1,000 cubits of clear space. And then we have the Shabbos border, right? That we're going to measure 2,000 cubits that you can walk. And so the question is the 1,000 cubits of clear space included within the Shabbos boundary, as part of the Shabbos boundary, or do we extend the Shabbos boundary even further than that? And I'm just going to sum it up for you. And the answer is, the law is that you have a Levitical city that's, let's say, 2,000 cubits by 2,000 cubits. Then you have 1,000 cubits on either side, and top and bottom, and even more in the corners of clear space. And then the Shabbos boundary that you can walk another 2,000 cubits begins after the clear space when you're talking about one of the cities of the Levites. That brings us to the end of our discussion of the first Mishnah here in chapter 5 of Tractate Eruvin. And we're going to open our discussion of Mishnah number 2 just quite quickly, and then we'll get into comments and questions. In Mishnah number 2, we learned that Rabbi Meir says that a city, all cities, not just cities of the Levites, right? Cities of the Levites have this 1,000 cubits of clear space around them. Rabbi Meir says that all other cities have at least have a karpef around them, meaning 70 cubits. They're going to have a buffer area of 70 cubits, which is considered part of the city limits. And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Meir said, no, that's not for all cities. We only measure those 70 cubits as an extension from each city when there are two cities close together. If there are two cities that are pretty close together, then we see if we were to give 70 cubits to one city and 70 cubits to the other city, would those two 70 cubit sort of, ribbons around the city, do they overlap? If they overlap, then we're going to consider that these two cities count as one. We join them together, and anybody in each city can walk throughout both cities, and then their Shabbos boundary is measured 2,000 cubits in any direction from outside of both cities. Outside of both cities. That's only their two cities that are pretty close together. Otherwise, we measure the Shabbos boundary, the 2,000 cubit Shabbos boundary, from the city limits itself, not from 70 cubits past the city limit. Although some commentators will say, since Rabbi Meir is a very legit sage, and he says you can give 70 cubits, And this whole concept of the Shabbos boundary is rabbinic in nature. Therefore, whenever there's a possibility to be lenient, we're going to be lenient, and we're going to give people essentially 2,070 cubits, but that's a minority opinion. Most commentators agree with the rabbis who dispute, Rabbi Meir, and we only use that 70 cubit buffer if we're going to put two cities together. Otherwise, we measure the Shabbos boundary from the city limit. That's what I've got for us today. Let me see if we've got comments and questions. Sounds like no questions so far, but some comments. Tamara Blecker says, I take zinc supplements, and my health is pretty good, Baruch Hashem. Well done, Tamara. And thank you for mentioning it. It should be an inspiration to everybody. Hey, if we learn something new, this is very important. Sometimes, people think that, well, the most important thing to do is Torah study, and it is. And therefore, I'm not going to worry so much about, the healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, healthy exercise, etc. But actually, a pious person is going to be very careful about their health, because if they're not careful about their health, then they're taking the gift that they've been given by God for granted, and they may shorten their life. And if your life is shortened because of your own neglect, then what does that cause? It means that all the mitzvahs, all the obligations you could have fulfilled, all the commandments you could have done, all the good that you could have done in the world during those years of which you robbed yourself, it's an avera, it's a sin, right? You really have to take care of yourself so that you're alive and in this world as long as possible to fulfill your mission in this world. John Shore, who is a doctor, says, just went to check the label of my daily vitamins, 100% recommended daily allowance for zinc. Woo! Okay, so daily vitamins, got to make sure there's zinc in there. And I'm going to confess right now that I'm not taking daily vitamins, and it's a mistake. And I'm going to commit right now that after I get off the show, I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to order some daily vitamins and make sure I'm taking daily vitamins. Who am I to talk about all this and tell you what you should do if I'm not doing it myself? I'm blessed that my diet is quite balanced. Nina really puts healthy food on the table and a good mix of it. We do eat red meat on Shabbos. And so I'm not too concerned, but I'm going to start taking the vitamins. I'm telling you right now. Okay. Tom Beck says, vegetables are what food eats. I guess meaning vegetables are what the meat eats, right? So, but somehow they add something to us, but that's well worth mentioning. Okay. In terms of vitamins, do your research whether you think vitamins are good for you or not. Apparently, there are some mixed opinions about whether daily vitamins are all that. Lucy Ron Johnson says, plants rich in zinc. Okay, so if you're not going to get it from meat, here are some plants that are rich in zinc. Nuts, beans, garlic, radishes. So the Gemara was definitely onto something, telling us that garlic and radishes are very good. Also, mushrooms, spinach, broccoli, kale, oats. The sages were definitely onto something, says Lucy. All right. So again, zinc is important. We learned that today. You may not get it from vegetables. Make sure you get it from somewhere. Some people, there's controversy about whether daily vitamins are good or not. But I think the ideal thing is to talk with your doctor and find out what's good for you, because I'm sure that everybody's chemistry is a little bit different. And finally, Jack Tamir says, if a person lives in a house between two cities, what is the halacha? Assume he is a maple syrup farmer, for example. Right, so if you're not in a city, if you're not within the Shabbos boundary of a city, then you're out there on your own, right, between cities. Then you measure your Shabbos boundary, the 2,000 cubits that you can walk in any direction, either from your front door, or if you have an enclosure around your house, from the enclosure that's around your house. And that's where you would measure from. And if you needed to move it because you needed to go in one direction more than the other. So that's what we've been talking about quite a bit in this tractate, moving the Shabbos boundary, moving the Shabbos tachum. It's going to be 2,000 cubits in any direction from your dwelling. Your dwelling expands if it's within an enclosure or within a city. But the point is, it's the dwelling plus 2,000 in any direction. If that's not going to get you where you want to go, say to your neighbor's house, your friend's house for lunch, but you can get there if it's within, say, 4,000 cubits plus the dwelling. So you want to move your dwelling so that you can walk in that direction on Shabbos. How do you move your dwelling? That's what we've been discussing previously. But basically, you would either be standing at the place that you want your dwelling to be when Shabbos begins, or before Shabbos begins, you would deposit 2 meals worth of food in a safe place. And then you can move. That's considered your dwelling for Shabbos, and you're walking toward your dwelling when you leave your house on your way to your friend's house for lunch, and then toward that deposit of food, and then beyond it, and that's what's going to enable you to get to your friend's house. All right, that's what I've got for us today. May we all be blessed with the best possible health. May we all be spared any kind of illness, disease, condition, physical challenges. And if, God forbid, we experience those challenges, may we be healed completely and speedily. And we say, Amen.